Welcome to the HR Community Podcast. My name is Shane O'Neill, founder of Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Each episode we will host HR leaders and discuss their journey and discover best practice HR solutions across the HR industry. Whether you're a CEO, HR executive, or operating across the wider HR space, this podcast is for you. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to comment and share your reviews. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the HR Community Podcast. My name is Shane O'Neill. I am the director and founder of Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Today's a very special episode. We're joined with Steve Ivanovski. Steve is the reward director at Lion. And he's going to talk around data and around rewards. Steve has a lot of experience in food and beverage, which we can get into a little bit as well. So thank you for joining us, Steve.
Hi, Shane, and thanks for having me. Always good to see you.
Very, very welcome. Over to you again. Would love to hear a bit more about, your current role and a little bit about the organization, Steve.
Sure. So my current role, as Shane outlined, is I'm the reward director for the Lion Group. And my job is to drive our culture for performance and to being a high-performing organisation through the implementation of our reward strategy, our incentive programs, and our reward frameworks. You know, Lion's a leading consumer brand business that specialises in beer. You know, we're headquartered in Australia, and our purpose is to enrich our world every day by championing sociability and helping people to live well. You probably know us for some of our brands, famous brands like 4X and Tui's, plus some amazing craft beers like Little Creatures.
That's right. Very familiar, maybe too familiar with some of those products.
Some of our brands, yeah. And I certainly don't have any difficulty striking up conversations when networking. There's always a brand that someone out there loves with some of the amazing products that Lion sells.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. So look, tell us a little bit about your journey in particular in HR. I know we touched on it a little bit in the intro, because you've come from a really interesting path where you've been in the reward Rem and Ben's route and moved into more the generalist HR. And we talked a little bit about it before we jumped on, that you're sort of back into more that senior reward again. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I started in HR because I was drawn to the business, particularly the commercial aspects around how we manage performance, and then how reward is able to help to pull those levers that continues to drive that performance. And it all starts with goal setting and then tracking progress, and then ultimately seeing how incentive programs kick in order to reward for that performance. When I first started out in reward, it was all about modelling bonus pools and incentive plans. You know, that was always a passion of mine. And as I've been able to grow through my career, that's something that's always kind of followed me in terms of, you know, that work that I really love doing. But early on in my career, I did move into financial services, where I spent some time going through a rotation program because I thought it was really important to have that business skill and experience. So I spent some time on commercial lending on the lending desk. Also worked in sales for a while, and that really helped me to develop some business skills and hands-on experience in what it's like actually being on the front line. And they gave me some great insights then on understanding as well how we service customers, and ultimately how important it is to have those relationships with our key customers. So after I completed that program, I was then I made the decision to go back into HR and pursued my career within HR from then on in. And you know, I've always kind of continued upon that career path, having that holistic view of HR and being able to bring that broader knowledge to the table, thanks to that experience that I got very early on in my career of understanding the businesses.
Fantastic. And just on that, Steve, you mentioned getting some of the business skills, particularly around sales. Like how relevant or how important do you think that's been to your role now in recent years in the executive HR table?
Yeah, really important, you know, and I'll use an example, sales incentive plans. It's something that Reward have that very good working relationship with the sales team, and looking at it through the lens of design, how we incentivize the teams to, whether that's in how they execute on the front line or how they produce or sell in volume, or whether that's in gross margin or net sales. So to understand how that works, you really need to spend time with the sales team And
Yeah,
I'm
that's
always
right.
looking at opportunities to get out on the road with them, to partner with them, and then to learn about those key metrics that we need to be driving. That ultimately then becomes a win-win situation where if we are able to design incentive plans that work for the sales team, we know then that the results that they achieve ultimately then help the broader business achieve its goals. So I would say very much so. It's a relationship that you need to grow and evolve and understand the business, how it works. If you truly want to then nail those incentive plan design, that will then reward for that performance.
Fantastic. And I know you didn't come from the more sort of traditional HR pathway, as we initially discussed. But still, you would have seen a lot of change in HR over the years, or over the last couple of decades, and the transformation of the role it is today. Tell us a little bit about your views or what you experienced in terms of that transformation and change. A HR practitioner and many years ago in comparison to what we do as a function now.
Yeah, I've seen the role of people and culture change drastically over the last few decades. And what started out back in the 90s as personnel management and then evolved into human resource management, back then the HR team was broadly, you'd have a payroll person, a recruitment person, and then if you're lucky, if you had enough budget, a training person and a generalist. And so since that time, we've seen the sharp rise in functional HR. So, organisations have broader COEs that have come along, whether that's in reward, talent, organisational development, and most recently through systems and technology as well, through some of the really big brands in HRIS that have evolved through over the last few years. And that's where essentially the big shift has happened in HR through data, the collection and storage of data, and how we use that data in everything we do today. Back in the day, there was a certain data set that sat within the payroll system, and that was probably as much you could then extract out. And then you spend a lot of time in Excel manipulating data, preparing reports and all sorts. Whereas now, particularly with some of the larger data warehouses and systems that we have, you're able to store a lot of that in-house. And I've seen that as been a really big enabler for HR over the last few years. And, as similarly, the role of HR has changed as well. We need to be a lot more data savvy, a lot more understanding what the metrics mean, and that we can then translate them into our practices and what we need to do in order to continue to attract people, grow our people, retain them and motivate our talent so that they can deliver against their goals.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, in terms of a lot of that data, and I'm sure a lot of listeners understand that the why, how powerful is a lot of those metrics when it comes to making business decisions or even designing your HR strategy, Steve?
Critical, absolutely. I look at it as the data is what helps to tell the story and also to help inform. That's not only the so what, but then what next. And so whether it is a business case that the business is developing, or whether it's we're looking for funding for a CapEx program that will fund a particular system or implementation, the data is what helps to drive those insights in order to get that approval that we need. Similarly, in the reward space, it's really important to understand the importance of how that data then compares to business performance, to then understand ultimately the value that it brings to the organisation. So, for example, when we are looking at incentive plans, it's really important that we understand the cost of those incentive plans. We understand how that cost then translates to the business performance. And if the business is operating above target, then what does that mean from a funding perspective? Do we then need to work with our finance team to fund more money to pay out bonuses if they are going to pay out higher? Similarly as well, if a business is not performing as strong, then what does it actually mean from a costing perspective? And do we have enough funding? And if we have extra funding, then there's, what do we do with that additional money? So they're just some examples where knowing your data, understanding how it relates back to the business is absolutely critical in this day and age for HR practitioners.
Absolutely. And our episode today is quite timely as well, looking at the time of year, because I feel anyway, from a recruitment perspective, there's been a lot of talk about salaries and how do we
attract the right people, especially with a lot of salaries being inflated. And I'm sure you would have been, asked to sort of support with some of these ongoing, dare I say, issues. But what are your thoughts on that, Steve? Is that something that you've incorporated or looking at incorporating into your REM strategy as well as we enter the new financial year?
Oh, definitely. The challenges, the external challenges, they continue to provide a lot of opportunities to rethink how we approach our budgeting and our salary review processes. Particularly as we look in Australia, we've come out of the significant impact from Omicron earlier in 2022, and we've had now the Great Resignation or rotation that continues to play its role. That's also causing or resulting in salary creep, where it's no longer you were not able to attract the talent at certain levels, so you've got to rethink that. There's labour shortages, and then on top there's also now wage pressures that are coming through, and we've recently seen that through inflation numbers coming through, as well as minimum wage coming up. And so certainly in connection with some of my peers in the networks in Reward, what we're seeing is that it's a lot of the focus is around how you position the budgets that you're putting in for this year. We've got the superannuation 0.5% that's taken effect as of today, and so some organisations are choosing to not fund that increase out of their own funding, or other organisations are asking employees to take a pay cut in order to fund that. So, there's the approach that certainly conversations I'm having with organisations externally is, how do you package up that whole budget? How do you help people to understand what is the actual total amount that you're budgeting for those increases? Is that total amount part of super? Is the 0.5% included in that number? Are we also looking at then making some market adjustments as part of that budget? Being as transparent as you can to actually show, we hear a lot about 5% in the minimum wage that's been produced, but what is the overall cost to the organisation internally? You'd be surprised where sometimes the budget could actually be provided in a couple of different ways, but once you package it up, you actually see that it's pretty competitive and the company is actually passing on a decent increase.
Absolutely.
But that's only one part of the piece of the puzzle. At the end of the day, we are being asked to provide a lot more up-to-date data, and that's really important. Coming back to our key theme today of data, is even with pulling all the salary survey data that we have, being more relevant, more up to date with that, because there's been a lot of hot pockets in the market that have been quite challenging to attract people into, and so our role is to constantly look at different ways that we can source information that will help our leaders to then make decisions on pay, how they best want to do that.
Exactly right. And on the topic of data as well, I'm sure there's some organizations out there, and it's part of their strategy for the year, or maybe it was part of last year and they haven't got to it yet. What is sort of advice you would give organizations who are maybe in the process of investing and focusing a bit more on data and metrics, or planning to? Is there anywhere you think they should particularly start? Should they go and get an expert to come into the business externally, or are there any systems that they should think about? Or
yeah, it's a great question. I would encourage peers, if they are looking at starting up in this space, is first and foremost is having a think about what your strategy looks like. Where do you want to see yourself in the market? Do you want to be paying competitively at the 50th percentile, or do you want to be more market leading and more kind of leading at that part more towards 75th or higher in the market? That in itself helps to understand then what type of data you need to be sourcing and obtaining. Do you want to be comparing yourselves to specific boutique or niche parts of the market, or happy to kind of be part of the more general market? Because that also then determines whether you reach out to some more boutique survey providers out there in the market, or some of the more broader, bigger databases like your Mercers or your Korn Ferries or your Aons would have in the market as well. So it really depends on the strategy that an organisation would need to look at. You can always, adjust that strategy as you need to, depending upon what you're seeing in the data. But first and foremost is get a good understanding of where you want to be positioning yourselves against the market, and that will help you to determine that. And then once you've got the data, I've always said you've got to get your hands dirty. You've actually got to spend time sampling or playing around with it, doing different data cuts, seeing what it's sharing with you. Do you want to position match? Do you want to implement job grading? There's a number of different things to consider. But some of the best ways to actually work out what's the best data once you've got your hands on it is to actually just play around with it and see what it's telling you and what stories you can derive from it.
Absolutely. You're probably going to predict my next question, because I know we talked about it before. With a lot of, especially over the last couple of, now over the last two, maybe 3 years, there's been a lot of openness to more remote and hybrid working conditions. But even if we're just focusing on remote for a moment, when we look at what we offer employees as salaries and benefits, how do you feel that's kind of changed or changing when we talk about remote work? Because obviously that comes into the picture now, where yes, the cost of living has gone up, but also if you've got the ability to work from anywhere in Australia or in some organizations anywhere in the world, does that play a factor in how you remunerate and budget for your teams and employees as well?
Yeah, I certainly have. I've had conversations around organisations. They are looking at that process quite differently, and our perspective here, and we've got a really strong flex at line policy. To give you an example, and I've heard from other organisations that flex working now has become one of the most important parts of an attraction tool, as well as an employee wellbeing tool, so that our people can find the right flexible approach that works for everybody, a win-win situation. So it's becoming the norm is probably the simpler answer to that. In terms of, it's also been promoting a lot more open conversations between a manager or a leader and their team around what best works for them and how they can flexibly work together. And you're right, it's I've seen it through the talent acquisition processes as well, that this opportunity where, if you're hiring in Sydney, you can't find anyone in the city market, and a good candidate pops up in Melbourne, then it's no longer, we'll need you in the office, can't find. It's now absolutely an option. And so we've got that great opportunity where we can look across the country, as well as I have been aware of a number of examples where people will go and want to spend 3 months working in a different country, and
that's right.
Flexible working. So it's some of those examples where the traditional benefits are changing.
That's right.
It's no more about the perks of we get discounted movie tickets and gym memberships and that kind of thing. They will have a place, absolutely. We're not removing them, but we've got to get a lot smarter. And some of these benefits are really great examples of that. Flex working is really important. And I'm also seeing a lot of different ways in, people are starting work later, the flex times as well. So it's not just about the location, it's also about when you're starting work, when you're finishing work, supporting with balancing their lifestyle more with their work. And that's something that I'm going to see continue to evolve as we go through this year. So it's exciting, right? It's breaking the traditional norms, and it's something that is really quite exciting to be a part of in the benefits space, when given that it sits within that reward function.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm even seeing it myself, from a recruitment perspective, organizations who are traditionally, majority, if not all the time in the office, but also it kind of opens up a bit more of an outcome driven type of environment, which is pretty good in my opinion, performance wise. I'm mindful of your time as well, Steve, but I just wanted to sort of gauge a bit of insight here as well, especially for some of the more aspiring HR leaders or, potentially HR generalist individuals out there who are keen to break into the more specialized reward space. Like, what would be your advice to some of our aspiring leaders that are listening into the episode?
I'd say embrace the change and buckle up for the ride is the best way to describe it. I mean, HR have been through a lot, right? Through the pandemic, we really had to think very fast on our feet and come up with solutions when we didn't know the answer to a lot of these initiatives. And now it's a heavier focus around attracting people in this really difficult talent market, as well as retaining and providing more flexibility in how the ways of working will continue. And so, some of the key successes, if you like, that I've learned from over the last few years, particularly through COVID, is around collaborating with stakeholders is really key. Help them understand what you're doing, and sometimes even when not having the answers, actually presenting that view and saying, okay, well, at this point in time, where we are working on a number of different scenarios, but we haven't quite landed on the particular recommendation. But here's what where our thinking is, and it's that co-creation element that I keep hearing a lot more about throughout the ways of working. Is that we'll work out the solution together. Sometimes it's not just about trying to figure it all out yourself. So a lot of that is around that collaboration. The other thing is that try to have the end result in mind when you're particularly working on some of these new initiatives. You think about, well, where do we actually want to get to, or what do we want to achieve by this process, and then work your way back. I find that understanding or having a clear goal in mind, you're then able to work your way back and understand what you need to do in order to get to that big milestone. And the last part to talk about, coming back to that point around data, it's and I tell this with my team all the time. It's no longer good enough just to tell the story. You've actually got to provide a little bit more about, well, what will come next? What's the chapter in the book that hasn't been written yet? What would that look like? We call it the so what, the now what, and then what. It's really about that, bringing those more deeper insights into what you're working on, because not everybody has the same that has the time to understand things as deep as our reward people do. And so it's important that you're able to share those insights and essentially create that value that you bring to the table for the organisation, because ultimately that's what it's all about. We've got to create value in what we do, and that's our role that we should aspire to.
Amazing. Great advice there. Definitely taking note of that. Couple of last questions for you, Steve.
Sure.
Who would be your biggest influencer? Who influences you?
Influencers, it's probably changed a few times as you progress through your career, different people. Today, I'd say most likely would be Martin Moore. He's the No Bullshit Leadership podcast and Your CEO mentor. I love listening to Marty. He's got a lot of really important insights as a leader, and always have time. He's always at the top of my podcast list when I'm driving to work.
Same. Every morning when I'm walking in, that's what I listen to as well. Who do you influence?
It would be my family. I'd say I have pretty heavy influence on the way I work with my family. They do have to listen to my kind of sharing insights and views a lot, but so far they've been pretty accepting of my views. So, yeah.
Fantastic. What would be your ideal work environment? Hybrid, remote, or on-site?
It would be both. It would be a good combination. I like the time to work from home when I'm writing board papers or there's something I really need to focus quite a lot. But then also I really enjoy the face-to-face connectivity at work and having coffee catch-ups with team members, or being able to be part of particularly the board meetings where it's a very different dynamic doing it in the room versus dialing in. So
100%.
Best of both worlds for me.
100%. What motivates you?
What motivates me, I would say having a really well thought out plan and then being able to execute flawlessly or as best you can against that plan. I love watching a good plan actually take effect, and it translates watching sport as well. I love watching when a team, they just absolutely will perform amazing on the field, and the commentators will often talk about, well, you can see they had their game plan and they just absolutely executed so well on that. So that's what I try to bring into the workplace, where we spend the time to develop the right plan, we socialise it, we get it agreed. If we need to adjust throughout, we will through agile working. But ultimately, it's so rewarding to then see a good plan that you can pull it off and successfully.
Absolutely. That leads on to my next question. Tell me a little bit about sport. What's your go-to sport or hobby?
Premier League. I'm a big Manchester United fan, so unfortunately haven't been quite as happy over the last few years. But really enjoy the strategy behind football and just the planning and preparation that goes into it, and the discipline of the players and the skill that they bring to the team as well. I do look at, there's no fluke that a lot of the famous clubs, they are so successful year on year. And because that comes back to their planning, their coaching, the capability of the players, and also the culture as well.
That's right.
I've always talked about I use sporting analogies a lot in my day-to-day work, and I've always used examples of, you look at the All Blacks rugby team, how they dominated for so many years. You look at the Queensland rugby league team, how they, went through such a really successful period. And, teams always have, if they have the right culture, they've got the right winning attitude, they've got pride in their team that they play for, it breeds success. And I love using those analogies, probably too much for my team, but yeah, I'll keep going for now. It's working.
Yeah. It's working. Don't fix it if it's not broken. Final question for you. We spoke a couple of months ago. I think things were still a bit choppy with the globe when it came to travel. But what would be your ideal travel or retreat, or have you got anything planned?
Yeah, I'd love to retreat to a beach on Hawaii.
Lovely.
Cocktail, loving the warm weather there, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
It's a long trip, but, it's certainly something to aspire to getting back to. That would be amazing for me.
Certainly worth it. You'll definitely get some motivation when you walk outside in Sydney these days. It's pretty choppy out there. Look, thanks so much for your time, Steve. Great insights. I love the insights, particularly around the data and the metrics. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks, Shane, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the HR Community Podcast. Remember to like and subscribe and share your views and comments below. This podcast was brought to you by Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Whether you're a candidate looking for a new role or organization looking to secure brand new talent for your team, please get in touch with us today. Thank you.